Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most kind. आज वो कश्मीर है महकमो मजबूर ओ फकीर कल जिसे अहले नजर कहते थे ईरान सगीर. Today, that land of Kashmir, under the heels of the enemy, has become weak, helpless, and poor, once known among the wise as Little Iran. The famous poet of Pakistan, Allama Muhammad Iqbal, called Kashmir Little Persia in his collection Arghaman-e-Hijaz. He refers to Kashmir as Little Persia as a form of endearment and in reference to the splendor of its natural beauty. Today, the conflict in Kashmir has become a global issue simultaneous with long drawn-out conflicts in other parts of the world. Indeed, Kashmir is a global issue which people of my generation have witnessed our entire lives. The prospect of its resolution should be at the forefront of national debates in India and Pakistan. Yet Kashmir always takes a backseat behind domestic politics. This speech will explore the various forms of violence Indian forces have imposed on illegally occupied Indian Kashmir, from genocidal crimes to constitutional changes which permanently alter the status of Kashmir and negate the will of its people. It will argue for justice to prevail and for the people of Kashmir to be granted their wish of self-determination as constituted by the United Nations. Every year, Kashmir Day is recognized in Pakistan on 5th February. Ordinary citizens of Pakistan stand on the streets and hearken to the sympathies of the Indian government to ease its stranglehold on the region. Slogans and placards fill the streets of capital cities in Pakistan in support of a free Kashmir. However, their efforts seem to fall on deaf ears as time and again the Kashmir issue is ill-fated to result in a diplomatic standoff. Amidst the resolutions and diplomatic meetings which make it to the headlines, the situation in Kashmir holds very real repercussions in the everyday lives of Kashmiris. In the case of 70-year-old Fayaz Tilgami, a well-known Kashmiri poet, the actions of the Modi government in August this year to repeal Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, which grants Kashmir a special constitutional status, have left Kashmiris feeling robbed of their identity. The poetry is no longer about love. It is about what feels around, the helplessness, the chaos. They are dead everywhere. With its independent status repealed, the BJP government is free to assert its radical Hindu ideologies in the region, robbing Kashmir of its Muslim identity. Why the issue cannot be resolved and the people of Kashmir granted their right to self-determination is because of the selfish interest at stake behind its accession. The inaction of the United Nations to note instances of Indian brutality and the overstepping of UN-sanctioned treaties has led to a deadly and violent consequence for the people of Kashmir. For example, in August 2019, after almost 50 years of silence on the issue on the part of the United Nations Security Council, a closed-door meeting was held in New York to discuss escalations in violence following the abrogation of Kashmir's special constitutional status. Following the meeting, India insisted on not needing international bodies to negotiate the deadlock, with India's United Nations ambassador saying the issue was entirely an internal one. This, paired with the UN Security Council's inaction on calling a meeting on Kashmir, is evidence of criminal negligence leading to suspicions of bias on the part of council members and stakeholders. The long-held inertia on the part of global powers is a daily reality experienced by Kashmiris in the form of violence, enforced disappearances, and a continuing lack of security. Unfortunately, the extent of violence and trauma faced by the young and vulnerable in Kashmir does not even make it to the headlines. In 2020 alone, there have been 53 internet lockdowns to curb the spread of information and limit information about Indian-occupied Kashmir to the global community. Perhaps most shockingly, the recent suspicions of demographic change and ethnic cleansing in the region should raise alarm bells amongst the global community. With evidence of the use of rape as a military tactic, India's actions are beginning to resemble those of Serbian forces against Bosnian Muslim women in the 1990s and the Burmese military in the Rohingya crisis of 2017. As the endemic use of torture extends in India, the chances of demographic change increase, and the issue of Kashmir holds repercussions for territories outside of its borders. Inaction by the UN is only aiding in increasing the likelihood of a Muslim minority Kashmir in the near future. Without any action taken for India's already steady encroachment in UN, the UN is ensuring the gradual takeover of Kashmir by Indian military forces. In 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru, the then Prime Minister of India, promised Liaquat Ali Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, that, quote, "We will withdraw the troops as soon as peace and order is restored and leave the decision regarding the future of the state to the people of the state." He said, "This is our promise to your government, to the people of Kashmir, and to the world." Unfortunately, this promise has long succeeded. Over the years, India has begun treating Kashmir as one of its own states, through the use of force, and in doing so, is overlooking the UN resolutions on Kashmir with impunity. This unfortunate state of affairs should be addressed before the demographic and socio-cultural history of Kashmir is changed forever. As one of the most militarized regions of the world, Kashmiris today live under constant fear of violent assaults and aggression by the Indian military. This goes against the rights of the people of Kashmir, who are being treated as pawns in a conflict they did not wish upon themselves. Pakistan has tried time and again to resolve the dispute peacefully, going to the effort of approaching the UN Security Council to insist on a plebiscite free from military influence. However, India has repeatedly refused to concede to any proposal by the United Nations. Indeed, this is evidence of India's intentions to extend its presence in Kashmir till the suffering Kashmiris succumb to pressure. Fortunately, Pakistan is the only country repeatedly raising the issue to a global platform, with other member states choosing to exercise their diplomatic influence. Indeed, justice delayed is justice denied. For how long will the cries of Kashmir remain pitiful reminders of an issue which sees no conceivable end? The unspeakable stories of rape, torture, and sodomy are enough to bring a stranger to tears. Women and children have been subject to constant harassment and violence from the occupying forces in Kashmir. Rape has been used as a means of military torture, and evidence can be found in reports of the Human Rights Watch, which collude with the observations on demographic change foreseen in the valley. India has been ridding Kashmir of its democratic rights long before the removal of Article 370. Through increased military surveillance, detaining of political leaders, banning of public meetings, and telecommunication and internet shutdowns, the government is overtly suffocating the lives of locals in Indian-occupied Kashmir. These abrogations of democratic rights lead to ripple effects such as radicalization and terrorism amongst the Kashmiri youth. Not only is the Indian government enforcing punitive constitutional measures which suffocate the daily lives of Kashmiris, they are also responsible for hundreds of enforced disappearances and deaths of Kashmiris. And yet, India termed an independent international report on human rights violations like rape, torture, and extrajudicial killings in the region as fallacious. The report, researched for over a decade, recommended an investigation by the UN Human Rights Commission into New Delhi's actions in the valley. While the repealing of Article 370 is a more recent act, in 1990, the Indian military made itself immune to prosecutions of human rights abuses through the implementation of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. The act shockingly conferred broad powers upon special forces that, to the objective bystander, became perilously close to martial law. Despite international bodies taking note of these violations of law, the government of India's callous stance on the issue has not subsided and has resulted in a failure to review or repeal the law, likes of which exist only in Israeli-occupied Palestine. Instead of being the epicenter of tourism and natural beauty, Kashmir has become a repressive state, where the young and vulnerable balance on the precipice of constant uncertainty and violent intervention. At a time like this, I would like the people of Pakistan to take note from the poetry of Allama Muhammad Iqbal, who reminds us that perhaps one day this may change. निकल के सिरा से जिसने रोमा की सुल्तनत को उल्टा दिया था, सुना है कुदसियों से मैंने शेर फिर होशियार होगा. The lion who emerged from the desert and toppled the Roman Empire is, I am told by the angels, about to get up again from his sleep. Thank you.